This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on Panchayat elections in Jammu and Kashmir. The participants are Rahul Jalali, political analyst, and Nikunj Garg, journalist.
Mr. Jalali, there's an important, in a way, one can call it unprecedented development that's happening at the level of grassroots democracy in Jammu and Kashmir. Past voting percentage, if it is an indicator, voters are clearly very, very enthused. And today, again, what we are seeing, the trends at least indicate that there is heavy polling in all the areas that is happening. How do you see it?
Well, I think it's going to be a game changer given the scenario in Jammu and Kashmir, especially Kashmir. If you look at the first phase of the Panchayat elections, and I'm talking Panchayat elections, the voting percentage overall in the state was 74%. But if you look at Kashmir, the voting percentage there way exceeding 60%. But crucial to that is the areas where polling took place, and heavy polling. Districts of Kupwara, which is terrorist infested, Baramulla, and especially areas which are right on the border, Uri, etc., where polling touched nearly 70%. So this goes to show that as far as grassroots democracy is concerned, people of Jammu and Kashmir are really yearning for this kind of democracy to come to them. In the past, you have noticed when it was declared that governor's rule would be there in Kashmir, there were virtually celebrations in Srinagar as well as Jammu. Fact of the matter is that this gives an opportunity for Kashmiris and from people in Jammu and Ladakh to see a new type of politics, or at least the birth of a new type of politics in the state.
Mr. Jalali, let me play devil's advocate here. Many would say that it's all right that people are voting, but people are voting because they want local representative to do the job of what local municipalities or the local governing bodies or councils do. But the overarching idea of militancy and terrorism and alienation does not get addressed even by this.
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that people are voting. Yes, maybe you're right. They're voting for their daily needs to be fulfilled by their representatives. But the fact of the matter is that people are voting by defying and making a political statement by defying the diktat of the terrorist, which is not to vote. So that is going against the trend which terrorists want to set up in Kashmir. So when the numbers are huge, and especially for Panchayat polls, you had city elections before this, but when Panchayat polls attract this huge number, look, rural Kashmir is moving away from the gun. It's a clear suggestion. Also look at the other number. In this phase, the second phase, the total number of the Panchayat seats which are going to be there is a little above 1,200. And there are over 4,000 candidates contesting elections. So look, it's not a question of what you were hearing earlier that there are no candidates. There is a plethora of candidates. Plus, there are regional forces as opposed from the two mainstream parties who have boycotted elections, who are coming up in contesting elections. So, obviously, there is going to be probably the beginning of a new opportunity for people of Kashmir to choose from, new kind of faces which might emerge from these elections.
Mr. Jalali, the two mainstream Kashmir-based political parties have usually, in the past, stalled local body elections. That's a fact.
Yes, they did not.
They did not allow them to happen. They always continue to maintain that the atmosphere is not right, despite the fact that Mr. Farooq Abdullah fought an election in Srinagar, became a member of parliament. But his party in the past, PDP as well, have been stalling it. Do you think that with the turnout that we are seeing, these parties have made a big mistake there and they will realize their folly in time to come?
Well, I think they're already realizing their folly. As far as PDP is concerned, I doubt if PDP had the necessary strength numbers on the ground to put up candidates. As far as National Conference is concerned, they are probably ruining the day Farooq Abdullah decided not to participate in election. They must be kicking themselves because really they have lost out. They've lost out in terms of emerging as a Jammu Kashmir party of the mainstream. Their possibility was there, very much there. So they are the biggest losers in this election. Secondly, they've kept space open for others to occupy this vacuum. And I'm pretty sure there'll be a third force or a fourth force which will fill in this vacuum. And it's going to happen. It's happening. So that way National Conference has taken a beating. That realization is there, and you see that realization. The number of proxy candidates which are contesting, rebel candidates, or whatever you call them, who are rebels from National Conference. Mr. Junaid Mattu, who's just been elected mayor, is actually a rebel National Conference. He was the official spokesperson of National Conference who resigned and contested elections from Srinagar. So, you see, there is a problem with the party. The party is losing its people. So, obviously, secondly, the other major problem, which I see it in terms of ideology and politics of National Conference, they have got to redefine and reassert their identity as a mainstream party. What I mean is that they have today sided with a slogan which came from the separatists. So how are they going to dealing themselves from the separatists? That is a big question before them.
And isn't it a dichotomous position? I mean, you will participate in the elections that you wish to participate.
Exactly.
But you will not participate in the fuller process of enfranchisement of the voter or the citizen.
But if you look at it, this has been the strain which these two mainstream parties have followed. In 2011, Panchayat elections were held in Kashmir. 35,000 panches were elected, which is not a mean number. But the assembly refused to transfer any power to the panchayats. Again, panchayat elections were due 2 years ago. Now look at PDP. I'm first talking of the National Conference because then they were in power. Now look at PDP. They did not hold panchayat elections for 2 years unless the governor's rule came and panchayat elections were held. Secondly, transfer of power also takes place to the panchs under governor's rule. This was an essential thing about panchayat elections. This promise was made by both these parties before the panchayat election, but power would be transferred at the grassroots level. They never did it. So obviously, the reluctance about holding panchayat elections, about parting with power and money, I think that's also crucial, was there always in these two parties, and that's reflected by their willingness to go in for a boycott.
I am calling it a dichotomous position. Many would call it outright cheating, because if you promise one thing in your manifesto before you are fighting the elections that you are wanting to fight and you don't implement it, it's outright cheating.
That's where I talk about duplicity. They have foo-fooed the last city elections that these were not good because the polling numbers were very low. But then what about Dr. Abdullah? Let's not forget that he has become a member parliament with just 3% vote. That is what the polling was for him, in a total of about 6% voting. So where is the rhetoric going? There has to be some credibility in what you say. Secondly, if they were so bothered about Article 35A, which is the excuse they used, they could have used participating in this election and converted it into a kind of a vote about 35A instead of walking away. So they've not really defended 35A. That came in as an excuse to boycott election. I think the idea behind these two parties not participating in the local body elections was to scuttle these elections. They were against power being transferred to the grassroots level. So in a way, they were against representative democracy.
And people will say that, empowerment of voter was empowerment of the citizen actually.
Exactly.
Is something that they were stalling.
There is another essential thing which I need to point out. A panch or a sarpanch in Kashmir, I'm singling out Kashmir, and even Jammu for that matter, or Ladakh, lives within the people who vote him. He is from that area and he doesn't move away. While an assembly representative, MLA, is usually, and given the security situation in the state, they are virtually prisoners or willing prisoners of the urban areas. They never go to their electorate. So the demands of the electorate are never met. The electorate does not have access. That entire equation was going to change with these elected panchayat representatives, the sarpanch and panchas, who would be within the people who elect them. So obviously something will be done.
In that sense, what we have discussed in terms of empowerment or rollout of the grassroots democracy, this initiative of Centre would certainly be called a path-breaking initiative.
Well, yes, of course it is. It's probably going to be the turning point for Jammu and Kashmir. Turning point in the sense, you see, with the participation in election and with people's demands being met in terms of employment, in terms of local activity and things happening at the ground level, I think, yes, of course, people are going to respond. And this, mark you, will also probably throw up a new kind of politics in the state.
A new kind of leadership, probably.
Exactly. A new leadership is going to emerge, which is, you see signs of that. You see new faces who are making a mark. So a new politics, a new leadership, probably new parties.
And since you describe it as a path breaking and you are saying it can be an inflection point in Jammu and Kashmir, what do you think was the feedback that the government of India got before they took this decision? I mean, which sort of prompted them, despite all kind of opposition, to go ahead with this decision? Because it's important for our listeners to know.
Well, I think one of the basic things was the constant feedback which was coming from the rural level, from the grassroots level, if I put it that way, of work not being done, of unfulfilled expectations from the so-called elected representatives who were there, and the frustration among people from this, their expectations not being met. I think one of the biggest examples of this feedback was that when governor's rule was declared, there were sweets distributed on the streets of Srinagar. You can't think about it. An elected representative is removed and sweets are distributed. So obviously look at the level of the frustration with the people. So they were waiting. They want a change in scenario. Secondly, look at the participation during last elections, the last Panchayat elections. 80% and above voting. So that is a declaration on the part of the people of Jammu and Kashmir that they want Panchayat representatives. They want grassroots democracy. I think that was feedback enough for the government to do it. What I commend the government for is showing the will to go ahead with this election. I think it was not an easy thing for them to do.
And determination.
Exactly. It wasn't easy for them to do given the boycott and the other kind of threats which came about. But they went ahead and did it. So that, I think, they need to be commended about.
Now, there are two other players. I mean, one is a fringe player, another the main sponsor of terrorism and disturbance in Kashmir, which is Pakistan and Hurriyat. Pakistan, of course, because it serves their interest to continue to meddle in the affairs of Kashmir, continue to create mayhem, and people will suffer as a part of that. On that, Government of India will have to take certain more steps on both LOC and international border. But Hurriyat, what do you think is the writing on the wall that the Hurriyat should see here?
Well, I think the Hurriyat is noticing the writing on the wall. It's in fact an announcement. And the announcement is that they have become irrelevant to Kashmir politics. Today, Hurriyat is not followed. Hurriyat is probably on its last leg. In any case, look at Hurriyat. I mean, it's an amalgam of 28 parties. And these 28 parties don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues. And secondly, they've been fairly exposed. The NIA raids, which have shown the kind of wealth they've amassed in the name of so-called separatism, and the number of properties they've built. So the people in Kashmir know this. And secondly, for all these years, except death and violence, other innocent Kashmiris, not their own children, what else has Hurriyat achieved? I think the irrelevance of Hurriyat to Kashmir is fast sort of gaining currency everywhere. And I think Hurriyat has to completely give up their politics. I don't think they would, but they have become irrelevant. So I would not take Hurriyat as seriously as they would have been taken or they were taken, let's say, a decade ago.
And probably the people themselves are not taking them seriously as a result.
No, not at all.
We are seeing the results in voting.
Yes.
And my final question to you, Mr. Jalali, certainly cannot be completed without the fact that the contribution of both the security forces and Election Commission in carrying out such a mammoth exercise in such a security-sensitive areas, large areas, huge geographical tracts, without much, of course, some bloodshed is inevitable when it comes to Kashmir, courtesy Pakistan, but without much large-scale bloodletting.
Look, isn't it amazing? Because if you look at the city elections, the council elections which took place, there was not a single incident of violence all through those phases. And given the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, where violence is around the corner every time, for the Indian security forces, along with the Election Commission, to ensure a violence-free elections, and even if you take the first two phases of the Panchayat polls, there's hardly been any violence during the process of voting. So look at the confidence that inspires in the voter to come out and vote when they know that the Indian security forces are there to take care of them. So obviously, it's a big thank you to both the Election Commission plus the Indian forces.
Thank you, Mr. Jalali.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on Panchayat elections in Jammu and Kashmir. The participants were Rahul Jalali, political analyst, and Nikunj Garg, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website news.air.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.